So today, hey everyone, I'm Marcia Nedland. I am a consultant, but I'm also one of my gigs is to be an organizer for the Middle Neighborhoods Community of Practice. And I'm also on the National Middle Neighborhood Steering Committee, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Today's webinar is helping private and nonprofit landlords be good neighbors in middle neighborhoods. And we have just an amazing lineup of speakers for you who are deeply experienced in working with landlords and training landlords in particular, we're going to be talking about today, but also a couple of them are landlords themselves. So we want to start, we always like to figure out what sector people are joining us from. So if you want to just complete this little poll, we'll take a look at that. We generally, in the Middle Neighborhoods Community of Practice, we have about 4,000 people across the country now, and our biggest two groups of members are from nonprofits that do primarily housing in a place-based way, and from local governments. And then we also have a smattering of people from like state government, federal government, intermediaries, et cetera. Yeah, that looks about right. Okay. And have we shown the
We did.
poll to everyone?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thanks everybody for doing that. Okay. So I'm just going to say a couple of things about middle neighborhoods before I turn it over to our panel. The Middle Neighborhoods Initiative, for those of you who don't know it, is a national initiative that's really about mobilizing attention on middle neighborhoods, which are basically just neither the most distressed neighborhoods in a city, nor are they the healthiest. People tend to leave them on autopilot, sort of, or think that they can do okay on autopilot. But as we've figured out from research and the experience of practitioners around the country, in fact, we're really losing our middle neighborhoods to either gentrification or to sort of, sliding into becoming more distressed for lack of attention. And since we really see that those middle neighborhoods are kind of the mixed income places that so many of us in community development are trying to create, it seems very important to preserve them and to figure out what makes them tick, and to sort of spread the word about their importance, and also to do this webinar series to help practitioners talk to other practitioners about what seems to make a difference. So we have a community of practice. We also do research. We have some policy analysis and advocacy and communication strategies. And this is a joint venture between NeighborWorks America and the National Community Stabilization Trust. I think I have one slide about middle neighborhoods. Yeah, just again, the characteristics. We don't have hard and fast metrics for them, although you'll see in a minute, one of the first ways that people generally do a quick sort to start to look at what might be a middle neighborhood is sort of that middle AMI range of, maybe depending on the community, it might be 60 to 100 or 80 to 120 or, whatever feels like the right line of demarcation in your community. But some of the characteristics are that they tend to be mostly single-family homes built for families with children, which is nationally a declining demographic, although not necessarily in certain neighborhoods. And that's part of, I think, the struggle with that some middle neighborhoods have in competing for today's home buyers. They do tend to still be well more than 50% owner occupied. In many places that has been eroding, as usually it has to do with the characteristics of the bed bath configuration and just lack of updates make the properties more attractive to investors, or less attractive to owner occupant buyers, I guess. And so we're going to be talking about what is that other 50% or, up to 50% we usually see in middle neighborhoods of rental property. And I think many of us know that there's more recently been this kind of move by investors to buy single-family housing stock for rental. In any case, the housing stock tends to be aging, of course. It's an acceptable condition, but that features and updates thing is an issue. One of the things I love about middle neighborhoods is that they tend to be more diverse in many different ways than either their lower income or higher income counterparts. As I said before, I think they are the mixed income, um, mixed all kinds of in many different ways neighborhoods that we all think are great for households, excuse me, to move up in the world and make their mark. Some cities will call these workforce housing or missing middle housing neighborhoods, all the same thing. So we do always like to point out in our next slide that we have to follow us on LinkedIn, take a look at that. And we have a mapping function on the website that you can all take a look at if you want to take a quick sort on where your middle neighborhoods might be. It looks at MSA, and then you can toggle on the left-hand side a number of different income toggles, and it just shows the census tracts by those different income ranges and relative to city, regional, or national AMI. It can start a conversation. So yeah, there's our LinkedIn connection. I think our PowerPoint's freezing a little. And now I think I might be able to introduce, yes, our wonderful panel. So today we have with us Mary Leo, who's the Executive Director at the Housing Council at Pathstone in Rochester, New York. And that organization, I've been hearing rave reviews about it for many, well, dare I say decades in my own career. I used to live and work in upstate New York, and it has a great reputation for being very creative and responsive to what's going on in the community, and for taking on an issue that isn't common to take on, which is the idea of how do you provide training and support to landlords so that they can really be both successful and good neighbors. Our second panelist is Erica Miles, who graciously agreed to do this the day she got back from vacation. And Erica runs really a flagship program in Chicago at the Community Investment Corporation. It's what you can do when you have a huge population center and some resources in terms of really comprehensive training for the landlord community. So we'll get to hear all about that. And then we have a little twist on the conversation from partners and founders of Cleveland Housing Solutions, Anna Perlmutter and Scott Crayley. They came from an academic background studying rental housing and in particular evictions. And then they became property owners themselves, and they run an organization that provides consulting to other organizations, usually, I think so far, nonprofit landlords. And they're really living and experimenting with and documenting the concept of sort of zero eviction policies and what are all the alternatives that you can pursue so that people are not evicted. And one of the interesting things to me about this is that they're doing this primarily in a neighborhood, a middle-ish neighborhood, I would say, in Cleveland, that used to be more distressed and has sort of strengthened and improved and has become fairly expensive. So they're in that end of middle neighborhoods where they're trying to mitigate some of the effects of success. So we're going to start with Mary Leo today and hear about the Housing Council at Pathstone and what they do. Again, I want to welcome all of our speakers. Everyone, I should say, will get a follow-up email with the link to the slide deck and to the recording of the webinar, so no worries about that. So if we can tee up Mary, and you can take it away, Mary. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, let me get my PowerPoint up. Everybody see my housing stability through landlord education title page? Okay.
Sure
And
do.
Marcia and I'll just ask, I'm not going to keep the chat open on my screen so it looks so I can maintain eye contact with everybody. So just let me know if there's a question in the chat. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us. I appreciate Marcia's very complimentary Introduction of our organization. I'm very proud of the Housing Council. We are now the Housing Council at Passstone. Passstone is a very large human service provider. We're in 7 states and Puerto Rico, but founded and our base is here in Rochester, New York. Uh, we do a lot of things around training and employment. We develop affordable housing. We manage affordable housing um, and do a variety of other advocacy work. But today I'm representing the Housing Council's one of our flagship programs around our landlord education, and look forward to sharing a little bit of insight of what we've learned and developed over the years. So um, a little history of us. The Housing Council at Passstone has been around for over 50 years. We are we're our own nonprofit up until 2013 when we affiliated with Passstone. It's been a really great fit and marriage for the organization. We've been able to leverage our strengths. Something unique the Housing Council brought to the organization was this emphasis on landlord education and fair housing work. So my slide here includes a photo of our city. You can see we have a city center and we're surrounded by a lot of really great neighborhoods, many of which would fall into the definition of middle neighborhoods. Um, we are the largest HUD intermediary and we do a lot of work in partnership with HUD's housing counseling program. Separate from that is our landlord education and some other services we provide to the community for uh, low and middle income rental housing. How do we get here? Well, like I said, the 50 years has been quite a journey. What was happening in our community 50 years ago is sad to say similar to what is happening now. After our city experienced what some call a riot or a rebellion in our Clarissa Street neighborhood, a local philanthropist put together funds for a study to examine the conditions of the neighborhoods that were rebelling. And out of that study, they really realized that it was the living conditions that was creating a lot of civic unrest. So after that study, they put together a housing council to investigate the issue even further, and that small council has turned into a full service organization that I'm representing today. So over those years, we developed a number of services for both tenants and landlords. We partnered with HUD on their Fair Housing Initiatives program and have developed foreclosure prevention services, first time homebuyer program. So our niche is really those low to middle income households that aren't quite in crisis, but looking to develop and expand their housing choices and arm them all with the same information. So we're not a pro tenant or pro landlord organization. We're pro, here's the information, here are the rules of the road, here's how to develop your choices and pursue your own, goals in terms of housing. We developed, as I mentioned, one of our flagship programs that I'm going to be focusing on today, which is called Operating Rental Property Course. It's a 101 because what we realized through working with tenants and housing providers is that folks were really unclear on what those laws were. There's a lot of rumors in our community about what landlords were supposed to and not supposed to do, and tenants weren't aware of their rights either. So what we offer in our rental property course is a kind of an A to Z over how you should be operating your rental units. We target what we call small business landlords, so those are those mom and pop shops, to make sure that they understand proper screening, basic business practices, fair housing information, and that they can stay connected to our resources to help them create a thriving business. Because we see that as twofold. We want to see people invest in our community through real estate, provide great housing to our community members, and that a well-educated and sophisticated housing provider is doing a great service to our low-income um, neighbors seeking housing. Um, we've updated that program over the years to include information from the 2019 Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act, and a lot of lessons learned through the COVID experience and the corresponding shutdown and moratorium. We also really try lately to emphasize how small business housing providers can access and benefit from resources that exist in our community, like the pros of Section 8 and the pros of using Department of Human Service benefits, and how to stay in communication with those other entities so that they don't write off particular resources because of false information. So again, our landlord services include training and support. We work on business forms and resources. If you visit our website, we have a lot of free documents and templates for things that you might find useful. We do emphasize fair housing, and we offer a hotline Monday through Friday that tenants, landlords, homeowners can all call to ask some basic housing questions. Many times it's not just a housing issue, there's a lot of things there. So we connect callers to other community resources, but we have some documents that we use as our um, guiding principles when answering those questions, and they are sourced from our New York State Attorney General's housing rights document, and some documents that we've developed in partnership with legal service providers and our other human service providers. So, um, good summary of what we do. A little deeper dive into operating rental property. We developed it to address a rise in tenant landlord disputes, a growing demand for rental housing, and the need for professional management of practices. You can't really go to landlord school, so you can go to, there's plenty of services for entrepreneurs. You can get some basic information about developing a small business if you want to own a restaurant or a retail shop, but there's not the same level of resources in our community if you want to, buy a double, put a for rent sign out front, a for rent sign out front, and get a tenant. There's a lot of folks that inherit um, a unit that they want to rent out, and they see it as a great cash flow opportunity, but then really stumble into a lot of problems that could have been prevented if they knew kind of what they're getting into. We focus on equipping our landlords with knowledge needed to comply with legal requirements, reduce vacancies, and improve tenant relations. Um, One key component is that we have the support. I know that there's a lot of employees from small government. We have a very strong relationship with both our county government and our city. They're very supportive of this work, and they've tied in their um, down payment grants and their grants for landlords to this class. So folks are incentivized to register for this class or referred to it once they've kind of encountered an issue and want to know more. Here's a couple of reviews from the survey of our participants. Sometimes folks think, oh, I've been doing this a long time. I really don't want to sit through a workshop. I know what I'm doing. But then once they get to class, not only are they hearing from our curriculum and our staff experts, but they also get to do some networking and sharing with their colleagues. So we've gotten pretty strong reviews. Everybody has said that they want to refer the class to a friend, and everybody feels that it's been a value to their practice. What are we talking about in class? Well, we go over the basics of lease and contracts, best practices around tenant communication, fair housing information, proper screening and retention strategies, record keeping, the basics of eviction, and property maintenance and repairs. That's become a growing area of interest for folks to understand what resources are available for them to improve their properties. Um, Beyond the operating rental properties course, which is pretty comprehensive, we started offering different workshops and webinars during COVID when we were all remote, just to have fresh topics. The rules were changing so often. We are really working hard to keep our community updated on those changes, what was true, what was not true. There was a lot of false information at the time. So we've done some kind of pop-up classes outside of the operating rental properties course. In certain instances, we will also work and provide technical assistance on a one-on-one basis. So sometimes someone calls um, our hotline. It's not just a quick hotline call, but it has to develop into a more long-term, a longer appointment, or we might have a grant that someone's interested in applying for, and we have to do a little bit of counseling and help them work a few pieces out for them to become eligible for a resource we may have. and then making those referrals to other community organizations that can support improving their housing or business practices, et cetera. Here's a couple examples of other things we do outside of the class. We completed a landlord ambassador program. This was repair dollars or tenant arrear repayment through through a state program that we connected folks with. We invested $1 million into the community post COVID to try to get vacant units back in the rental market. We had a few um, requirements for a landlord. They had to be small business by our definition. They had to maintain affordable rents for a particular period of time, and we placed a lien on the property to ensure that those things were adhered to. We're doing something similar in a more rural county, so less of a middle income type area. These funds are used to bring units up to the HQS standards and create a greater inventory of units available to Section 8 um, recipients. There was a real lack of available units to voucher holders in this particularly rural county. So we're partnering with the county government to do some outreach to those landlords, provide some repair grant money, and then ensure that that unit is available to HCV families, and to provide some more technical assistance and awareness of those housing providers on how the HCV program works. Here's a flyer. This is the kind of marketing you'll see from us to describe to the community what we're doing. Right now, our operating rental property course is a 6-hour class. We break that up into 2 online evening sessions, and that's been working really well for us. We also have other services. So we will list someone's unit. People come to us, tenants come to us looking for units. We will take the unit information and add it to our rental registry. So that's just an added bonus, a way that we stay engaged with these small business landlords, provide another service for them. And then that list goes out to every um, community organization that serves folks looking for housing. So it's been a very popular list for a long time. It's changed over the years. We'll go over that just because of the market and the technology in this space has changed, but still a service that we offer. So things have evolved. I'm sure everybody on this call has witnessed dramatic changes in their community over the last, let's call it 5 years. And we've definitely worked to evolve the content of our services and the information and how we're sharing that information with our community over that time. Um, in our region in New York, we had a major law passed called the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of 2019. It was the first major housing law passed in like 40 years. So it really changed how housing providers were able to conduct their business. And from that, we've seen a lot of folks just get out of the game, basically. And so we're seeing a new cohort of folks looking to invest in our community, and that's impacted our real estate market greatly. The moratorium, I'm sure you all are familiar with how that created a lot of tension between renters and property owners, how they managed to survive during that time. The increase in digital property management tools, a lot of things are going online. The business practices are changing, and we're trying to bring, the older generation of property owners into accessing those tools to improve their business practices, and doing our best to emphasize sustainable practices and connect people to high efficiency property upgrades. We have pretty brutal winters in our region and older housing stock. So energy efficiency has been a key component of our work as well. Any questions? We're doing all right? Okay. So some benefits of the landlord training program: improved knowledge, especially the legality of certain things around eviction. Tenants' rights is a key component of our work. We're hoping that reduces the risk of lawsuits and violations and just improves the quality of practices in our community. Financial stability. Eviction is costly. We want to see stability for both the tenant and the housing provider to see them build and have local investment grow. We want to see higher tenant satisfaction. I mean, more than half of the calls we receive on the hotline are from renters with a complaint about their housing provider. Not too many people, really love their landlord necessarily, but we want to ensure that anything that can be avoided in terms of conflict is avoided through education. A reduction in evictions. So, by learning proper screening and mediation techniques, hopefully we can reduce the number of evictions and overall community impact. So we want to contribute to the stability of our housing stock in the community, a greater level of engagement and understanding of the resources like Section 8 and the vouchers and social service supports. There's still quite a bit of stigma in our community, keeping up with the times. So, like I said, a lot has changed in our community since we started this work. We're a 50-year-old organization. And for much of that time, the laws were the same. In 2019, we had this huge, wide, very encompassing set of new laws that took place. And our community is adapting and understanding those laws. Um, the speed at which it's changed, I think, has been the biggest component of what's caused so much upheaval in our rental community, because at the same time, Rochester has been rated like the best investment in the country. We have a lot of middle neighborhoods. There's been a lot of folks going to remote work that see our affordability, what they consider affordability of our housing, to be a plus. And as prices have increased nationally, we've had a lot of out of towners come in and purchase housing, both investment property and personal single family homes. So it's just been a whirlwind of activity and changes. And our community is working to get up to date on how the law changes and the financial changes can create stability versus just this upheaval that we've had. Trends that we're seeing because of that, many landlords are still struggling with the impact of the moratorium that our state imposed, the financial strain that that put on them, the inability for them to recoup their costs, caused several or many to sell their properties. Unfortunately, we've seen a lot of those sales go to investment companies and out of town investments. Post COVID shifts. Um, a greater shift to online marketing tools for landlords, and who is becoming a landlord has changed as well. I'm going to move forward. I know I was given 15 minutes. A few things I do definitely want to show you is back in 2001, just before I got to the organization. This is an example of our rental registry. Ironically, the post office sent us this piece of mail that we had tried to send out back in 2001 to a tenant searching for housing. It got returned to sender this week, and it was a copy of our two-bedroom apartment listing. And you can see it was 2 pages long, and it would say things in the description like no DSS, no Section 8, no pets. You can see the pricing is around for a two-bedroom, somewhere about 400, 450, $450. And there was plenty to choose from across the city. We sent this out with a copy of our fair housing information and just some what to know when you're looking for an apartment. And then fast forward to today, this is an example of our current rental registry list of all bedroom types. So we used to have a two-bedroom list, a three-bedroom list, a studio list, and they all took up several pages. And now our inventory is down dramatically. And I think this just really reflects a lot of the trends that I was mentioning before. We still send out some good information along with those lists, but the amount of choice that tenants have has significantly dropped. So in conclusion, I would just say that we are working to continuously evolve the information that we're offering, be adaptive to the market, and provide real world education that's going to make an impact on people's practices today to provide high quality housing, address affordability and stability. We're continuing to partner with our funders and our local government to offer resources that can make housing quality and affordability more accessible to everyone. And we need to do that through expanded partnerships. So we're thinking more collaboratively and thinking outside of the box as the housing crisis continues to impact our entire community, both middle, higher income, and low income folks. It's brought more partnerships to the table because I think compared to 30 years ago, people really understand that housing is key to folks' mental health, physical health, and well being. And the real estate market, and having local investment is key to our overall wellness. So we have new partners at the table that we're trying to understand how can we all work together to make this a better community for everybody. So this is me. Joining us today is also our Assistant Director, Trisha Eisenman. She actually facilitates the ORP class and is the real expert. Um, but I'm more of the PowerPoint girl, so we decided that I would present today. But if you have any real questions, you're going to ask those of Trisha because she'll give you a better answer. Um, so thank you, everybody.
Mary, that was great. I want to ask one question for now, and then we'll do a lot of questions after everyone's spoken. But I just wonder if you could say a few more, give us a little more detail on the Tenant Protection Act in New York State.
Oh, well, yes, I will direct you to our website, which has some good summary and good documents on that. There was a lot of changes in eviction and in proper notice and the time frames that were needed to provide to our tenants, depending on how long they'd been there. It was kind of a precursor to some proposals around good cause eviction,
Mhm.
and there were pros and cons once it was put into play. Once that legislation actually hit the real world, there were some unforeseen consequences and some benefits as well. So we are still working those through, but a lot of that was around proper notice, how eviction timing could work, how the courts were going to handle that, and it became less of a pro se process. We actually had a workbook that we would give out at ORP and actually provide templates for documents for eviction out of our office, and our staff could kind of walk housing providers through that process. And now we really say it's best to consult with an attorney. It's just become a more nuanced process.
That's interesting. Maybe you or your colleague could just type into the chat a link to where the Tenant Protection Act description is
Sure.
on your website. Oh, and we have something from John Wiltsey. Hey, John.
Hi, John.
Um, it also provides rent control and rent to own protections. That's interesting for residents in manufactured home communities statewide. That's really interesting, John. Okay, well, I'm really glad that you have that information up on your website and that people can take a look at that. Okay, so let's move on to Erica Miles, who's with the Community Investment Corporation of Chicago and runs, like, when I looked at their webpage, it's like they have a calendar, they have all these different courses. It's amazing. But with a city as big as Chicago, I guess, it matches the scale of the city. So welcome, Erica. I can't wait to hear more about your program.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm very happy and excited to join you here today. And thank you for that. Just want to say that please forgive my voice. I'm just returning from vacation and I picked up a nasty bug on the way. So to just explain a little bit about that, I'm working from home today to save my colleagues the possibility of me being contagious. Given that, if you add things to the chat while I'm in presentation mode, I won't be able to see them, but please, I strongly encourage you to add things, and one of the partners here today will alert me to things that I might need to take notice of. But yeah, please, definitely, I want to hear back from you, so please do add to the chat. Okay, let me go ahead and start sharing my screen with you, and this is where I will no longer be able to see you. Just a minute, please. Okay. You know, it's funny how dependent we become on technology. And when you're used to two screens and then you go down to one, it's like, oh, what is this world coming to, right? All right, so there we go. Let's go into presentation mode from the beginning. Okay, great. All right, thank you very much for your patience. And let me set my timer so I don't go too far. So I really enjoyed listening to Mary's presentation because I noticed there are a lot of parallels between what Mary's experience in her area in comparison to what we're seeing in Chicago. So what I want to talk to you about is what is basically how can effective property management build strong neighborhoods? Okay, so that is me. My title is a training and technical assistance manager with Community Investment Corporation, the organization that I represent. And I'm very excited to be a part of CIC. So I want to tell you a little bit about how I came to this position because I am very new as a staff person with CIC. I joined the organization in August 2023. However, I have been familiar with and associated with CIC for a long time. In my 19 years experience as one of the mom and pop landlords that CIC primarily services, I actually have been through the training program that I'm now the facilitator of 3 or 4 times. So I know firsthand the importance of training programs like this and the value of them. And it's really an honor for me to be on the other side of the desk and to take the opportunity to share with others, some of the mistakes I made as a landlord and some of the successes that I've had as well, which allow me to, to share those with others and to help them to be successful. So I'm really happy to be here and a part of these conversations. So I want to tell you a little bit more about our organization. What is Community Investment Corporation? So we are sorry, getting these. I hope you're not seeing those pop-ups. But we are not a bank, but we're a lender. So basically, we receive our funding from banks and we make, oh, gee whiz, we make loans on their behalf. So we fall into the category of what's known as a CDFI, Development Financial Institution. And a little bit about the history of that. Some of you might be familiar with something called the Community Reinvestment Act. And that was an act where when we talk about the history of redlining, which some of you might be familiar with, where certain areas, particularly low to moderate income areas, and also, there was a racial element in many cases, were underserved by many of the big banks, and loans were not made in certain areas. So the Community Reinvestment Act was actually enacted in 1977. And what that was a way for these financial institutions to, work to unravel some of those practices that have been put into place. So I'm happy to tell you, CIC is celebrating 50 years in existence. So we predated that Community Reinvestment Act by a few years, but we're still, our mission is still the same to kind of, unravel some of those policies. So what we do is we receive our funding from banks in order to make the loans that, honestly, the big banks don't always have the expertise to make these loans, so we do that on their behalf. So CIC was founded 50 years ago, and things were going great in terms of making the loans, but maybe about 25 years after we started, it was determined that the full, I mean, it's the final goal is not just to provide funds to people who traditionally might not have had access to them so that they can buy rental property. We also want those borrowers to be successful, because in terms of, some communities not always having access to funds, then that also created a situation where the knowledge of how to successfully manage properties was also not, it was suppressed. It was not, people were not able to develop that knowledge because they didn't have resources. With the management training program that CIC offers was developed about 25 years ago in order to take the borrowers that we had and help them to, learn things, again, the best practices about how to be successful in what they were doing. So a little bit um, the, about what we do there. just advance. So some of the services that we provide through our property management training program, the signature, and what started it all is our in-person property management training certificate program. So this program it's required for CIC borrowers, and that's how it started. But the program was going so well that eventually it was expanded, and now it is a certificate that is accepted by many lenders, and not just CIC, but they will direct their borrowers to take our training in order to include it as a part of their loan package. So that's where it started. A newer option that we offer, which technically came about as a part as a result of the pandemic. It was started by my predecessor. It's a virtual on-demand property management training program, which also results in a certificate. These certificates are good for 2 years. And again, as I mentioned, they can be used as part of a loan package to apply for funding. In addition to that, we offer free single subject webinars, and those are topics like, what landlords need to know about assistance animals and pet policies. Because what we find is, some people say, I just don't accept any animals in my rentals. Well, be really careful about that because, technically you want to be within the confines of the law. So it's important to understand the ins and outs of that. We've offered free webinars on, how to support survivors of domestic violence because what we've learned is um, survivors of domestic violence fall into the category of one of the most housing vulnerable populations. And we have local laws that of course, it's the right thing to do, but also you have to understand the legality of it because we have, there's the law like the Violence Against Women Act, VAWA, and also the Safe Homes Act. So these are actually, laws that a lot of people are not aware exist that protect those survivors. So we want to make our owners aware of those. And also we've had some conversation about evictions. And I know Mary talked about it, and Anna and Scott will talk about it after me. So one thing that we wanted to make sure that we made our borrowers aware of is that the resources that exist in order to help families avoid evictions, and a lot of those resources came about as a result of the pandemic, but there were programs that were available before that. If you Google homelessness prevention, wherever you are, hopefully you'll see, a list of organizations that it is their mission to help people, especially when they get into these short-term situations where just a little bit of help can, help avoid this outcome. We want to know about that so that they can make those things happen. And then a newer thing that we offer is virtual book club. And this book club is actually, the goal of it is to help property managers and owners to better understand the neighborhoods where they're investing, because we know things don't happen in a vacuum. History didn't start today. So in order to understand and you have a deeper understanding of some of the issues that we face in different areas, is important to know how things came to be. Okay. All right. Oh, having a little trouble advancing. Sorry about that. Okay, so if you go to our website, you'll see here, this is an example of what our schedule looks like. So in that first column on the left, that's our online education, the virtual training that I mentioned, and that's on demand. It's self-guided. Basically, you can take that training in your pajamas at your leisure on your schedule. So that is a newer thing that is offered. However, generally, what we strongly recommend to people is that they take our in-person training. There are many advantages to the in-person aspect. One of them is that so it's an 8-hour all-day training. And one of the benefits is that when you come to those trainings, you're in the room with the experts. We invite experts in to talk about their different fields. So, for example, if you are learning about fair housing or some of our local landlord tenant ordinances, we invite in attorneys who, practice in that field every day. So once they finish their presentation, they're there for our attendees to ask them specific questions, which is great. Another benefit of the in-person training is the networking. I think Mary mentioned something about that too, that people really enjoy. Mary said there is no landlord school. There is no place that you go to get all this information. And what often happens is when people are making the choice to become a landlord, sometimes it's not a family history. It's not something that they, learned at the dinner table. So that when they get involved in that, they might not be, surrounded by people who understand what they're looking for, what they're trying to do. So to be able to come to a place where you're surrounded by your peers and people who are having a similar experience is really important. So the networking that is offered in our in-person trainings is really great. So you'll notice the difference is not that much. The difference in price is $50 for the virtual and it's $60 for in-person. Plus you get breakfast, lunch, parking, all of that stuff. So it's not, definitely not profit driven, but it's just, that in person just offers you a much higher quality of experience. Okay, what we cover. So in our trainings, in our in person trainings, we have two core pieces that we always cover. One is going to be we talk about fair housing, and I mean capital F, capital H, fair housing in terms of the Fair Housing Act, and we talk about awareness of the law and compliance with the law because we definitely want people to know about that. Then we have a series of local residential landlord tenant ordinances. For a long time, it was just the Chicago residential landlord tenant ordinance. And then, like Mary said, the law was the same for how decades, and then all of a sudden when COVID came, a lot of changes happened. So now in addition to the Chicago residential landlord tenant ordinance, there's also a Cook County residential landlord tenant ordinance, which is very similar but has some differences. So those are the things that we want people to understand. Now, those are the two components that give us the ability to issue the certificate. So we have to, those are the core pieces we have to add. However, in the course of that 8-hour day, we can cover a number of other topics, and those tend to rotate out because you can't learn everything that you need to know about how to be a good property owner or manager in 8 hours. So, we will talk about this today, that tomorrow. Preventing crime in rental units is something that we cover sometimes. We'll talk about securing vacant properties. We'll talk about tenant screening, any number of things on a rotating basis. And what else? So let me keep going. So one of the newer things we talk about the evolution of what we offer in property management training, and this is something that um, I started this year. What we have is a virtual property management training book club series, and again, that is to help people to understand the neighborhoods that they are investing in. And it also provides the opportunity, it happens over a course of several weeks. It also provides an opportunity for people to meet and have conversations and have some more of that, networking and sharing that people tend to really enjoy and find value in. Okay, my time is getting short. 15 minutes goes by so quickly. So, how do landlords benefit from our training? Well, don't take my word for it. These are some of the feedback. We do an in-class survey every class because, you never want to get comfortable that you're doing all the right things. You always want to ask. So people really enjoy the idea of learning about the laws. It's not a drudgery like, oh, I got to find out all the things that I'm subject to. People are happy have that information and they look forward to it. They also mentioned to us that they like that networking that I talked about. And, they like the real life testimonials, both from our presenters and that are shared among other people in the class. Okay, let me keep going. Current trends. So, the high interest rates, again, we heard that before. That's making it tough for all investors, especially newbies. The low housing inventory and increased competition, that's a big challenge. And then those lingering fears about, what happens if I buy a property and the government tells me that I cannot collect rent on that property? Where do I go from there? So that's still a challenge that people are worrying about. Okay. All right. And another thing I'll mention about that when we talk about the newer ordinances and the changes. So in Chicago, we had in 2020 something called the Fair Notice Ordinance, and I invite you to Google that. That was implemented, which created a big change in notifying tenants of two things, and that would be both a rent increase and also a non-renewal of a lease. So there used to be a time where people just, automatic, they knew it in their sleep. If they were deciding not to renew a person's lease, or if they were deciding to increase rent, they thought, I have to give 30 days notice. It's been like that forever, right? Well, the Fair Notice Ordinance says now that if a resident has lived in a unit anywhere from 6 months to 3 years, that landlord is now required to give that person 60 days notice of a rent increase or non-renewal. If the tenant has lived in the property anywhere from 3 years and up, that landlord is required to give 120 days notice, so 4 months. That's a huge difference from 3 months. And the interesting thing about that is when we talk about the landlord who's been there forever doing it, they know they've been doing this for years. There were a lot of not older age wise, but more experienced landlords who said, they would call me on the phone and they would say, yeah, yeah, yeah. They didn't know about this because they hadn't kept up with this change. So that's the value of trainings like this, not just for new people, but also people who've been around for a while. And the last thing I'll say before I close is that we are definitely supported locally. Our city government actually gives us a grant to run our program. In exchange for the grant, if you call 311 in Chicago and you are a landlord, you have a question about landlording, then your call is routed to me. I'm the person that is going to be on the other end in order to help answer a lot of questions and help people with some of the confusing aspects of this. And I think that's it. Yes. Thank you for allowing me to share in this important conversation. And I'm to see any questions you might have.
Thank you, Erica. That's really great. It's so interesting. I mean, your one-off topics are just fascinating. I found myself thinking, I wonder if I should sign up for this just so I can access your remote online topics. I'm not a landlord, but they sound like really, really interesting. And again, as you've both you and Mary said, there is no landlord school. It is amazing that we expect people to be able to run a small business out of that, right from the jump without having any way to learn about it. Actually, Mary and I were talking a little bit too about, the attraction of being a landlord. You don't need a college degree for it. It is relatively democratic in its accessibility, right?
Mhm.
Depending on if you can put the resources together to get your first property. So it's really interesting. But before I get too far off on the tangent, let's switch now to Anna and Scott, who again are from Cleveland Housing Solutions. And remember, they have this really interesting background and current situation of being researchers about landlording and evictions, and also owning rental property themselves and managing it, and providing consulting services to other landlords, largely in a sort of mission-driven pursuit of reducing or eliminating eviction as the only go-to remedy that landlords have for financial difficulties from their renters. So welcome, Anna and Scott, and I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you so much. That you really summarized it well, Marcia, and thank you for having us, to you and Anne, and to our co-panelists. This has been really interesting so far, and I'm learning a lot. Excuse me, I'm learning a lot, and thinking about my city in relation to the cities of the co-panelists, because there are a lot of similarities and there's also some differences. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. All right. Can you see that all right? Great. Okay. So hi, everyone. Again, thank you for having us. My name is Anna Perlmutter, and I'm here with my partner, Scott Craley. And together, since about 2010, we have operated Cleveland Housing Solutions, which we like to call a living laboratory. Sometimes we call it a living laboratory focused on sustainable, affordable housing solutions. And we really focus our work on thinking about the small scale private landlord and the housing ecosystem in which they and we operate as such. So I'm going to move on here. Hang on, okay. So a little bit about us. We currently manage a mixed income portfolio of about 35 rental units on Cleveland's west side, much of which would be probably called a middle neighborhoods of various states. The majority of our tenants we would consider very low income, which means that we experience firsthand every day the unique challenges that small scale private landlords face when we're trying to balance affordability, property quality, sustainability, and manage our relationships with our tenants and our deep desire to see them do well and our concern for their well-being. Through this work, we've developed a model that we call equitable landlording. It's an approach that is values-based and we believe should guide all affordable quality housing for low and moderate income renters. We are also, in addition to being private market landlords, we are researchers. I recently completed a PhD at Case Western Reserve University, and Scott and I together produced a really deep dive study of small scale private landlords in Cleveland. We studied their motivations and their decision-making practices, and also the Cleveland housing ecosystem in which they participate. So interviewing many nonprofit and governmental agency representatives as well who interact with small scale private landlords. So our research and practice together inform our role as housing advocates in Cleveland, which we've been for a long time. And we've helped local nonprofits and governmental agencies design and implement practices and policies, such as our work with Northwest Neighborhoods CDC, which is a community development organization that operates over 350 units of affordable federally subsidized housing. And we've helped them to build what is called the Eviction Diversion Initiative this past year or two. And also have done a lot of advising of the City of Cleveland's Lead Safe policy and other rental advocacy policies. So we're here today to jump into this conversation and want to talk about the role that we think landlords play and could play in middle neighborhoods such as the ones we operate. So I'm going to pass this on to Scott to take us away here.
Hi, everyone. Scott Craley. Great to be here. We're in Cleveland, which is one of the poorest big cities in the country. The median income is somewhere in the $32,000, $34,000 range. And we have some of the highest residential lead poisoning rates in the country, something that we're working hard on. The upshot is that people in the city, renters especially, have really serious needs. There's a lack of decent, safe, stable, and affordable housing. And so much of our work is geared toward really looking into what can we do to change the experience of those folks. And as we know, something like 60% of the people who are eligible for some form of housing subsidy, who could be eligible for, say, Section 8, or could be eligible for some other program, will not get it due to a lack of funding at the federal, state, and local levels. And so our work is very dialed in on what is the experience of those folks who should be or need to be getting support, but who are essentially going to be left to the wolves in the private market. And so a lot of what we do is kind of examine that experience from both the landlord side, the public sector side, and the tenant side to see if we can engineer better approaches that will result in better outcomes for a city and its low-income renters. You know, one of the things, as Marcia said, we live in a neighborhood that may be considered a middle neighborhood, although maybe 15 years ago it was facing some serious headwinds. We had a lot of property abandonment maybe 20 years ago, and had a lot of problems. And at this point is becoming increasingly inaccessible economically. It has sort of passed through the middle neighborhood place toward a place of increasing gentrification. And I think that that's one of the core challenges as you develop a middle neighborhood, to put energy and effort and public resources into stabilizing and improving a space without sort of subsidizing its acceleration into a space that's only accessible to those people who already have options. So we see in our own neighborhood and in neighborhoods like ours that as the community improves, as resources grow, as property values stabilize, landlords suddenly have alternatives to renting to very low-income people. And as we know through our own practice, as well as in engaging with landlords, renting to very low-income tenants is challenging both from a financial perspective and from a practice perspective. There's any number of complications in that relationship that can be very taxing on the business model, and also, especially for those mom and pop landlords who are deeply and personally involved in their investment, can be very taxing on an emotional level. So when property values start to increase and they have the opportunity to flip a property to a higher income tenant with fewer low income problems, a lot of them will take advantage of that. You know, training programs can be really beneficial in this ecosystem to help those landlords professionalize, but it doesn't always solve that problem of encouraging landlords to continue to target and support those tenants who are in some ways the least desirable tenants. Tenant screening practices, for example, sort of specifically weeds out those people who most need to be living in a stabilized neighborhood or community. So as we ask this question, how do you get landlords to do something that's a little bit maybe irrational, which is to continue to, as we have chosen to do, to continue to offer properties at affordable rents in a neighborhood where that's no longer their only option. And I don't think we have a really clear answer as yet, but part of our approach has been to say, okay, if that's the objective, we need a new framework for understanding how to get there. Our approach to our research has been through the framework of logics. So the logics framework involves, well, let me start by saying what Erica and Mary said about there not being a school for landlords. I can very much speak to that. You know, starting swinging a hammer in 2011 with the first duplex, it has been a long education and none of it has been formal. So it's been a wild ride and we've learned a lot along the way. And it's kind of remarkable how each person jumps into this and really has to blaze their own trail. And as they do so, they develop all sorts of ideas. I mean, some of which are great, some of which are terrible. And it's wild, the diversity of ideas that exist in that ecosystem. So part of what we do as we explore, like, how do we get to that better place, is we ask, what are people thinking out in the wild? And the logic is the sort of bottom level idea. So you can have many different logics. Sometimes you can have logics that conflict with each other internally. That's pretty common. But it's a form of analysis that we used where we jumped into these qualitative interviews with landlords, with public sector professionals at the tops of organizations, and those people answering the phones, and really kind of tried to understand how did they connect the dots in each of these day-to-day issues. And so here's a few examples. You know, you may have a homeowner in a middle neighborhood, in a stabilizing neighborhood, who's wants their kids to be safe, wants their street to feel like a good place to live, and sees a dilapidated property and associates it with crime. They may say, you know, maintenance of personal space, especially by landlords, is a big issue for me. A landlord may be dealing with, say, two tenants who are engaged in some sort of conflict with each other and be feeling pressure to resolve it, but may not have any tools to do so, and may have this logic that it's not my job to control my tenant's behavior. The public sector can bring in many different logics. Often, you know, landlords should follow the law. If it's a law, you should follow it. In some cases, this can be, as in all cases with logic, internally incoherent. We saw one example of a lead poisoning situation that mandated an abatement project, and that abatement project was hamstrung for over a year by the requirements of a historic district, which wouldn't allow the wood windows that had lead paint on them to be removed. So again, siloing is a big problem, or is something that you really need to look into. It's not so much like what is the problem here, it's how do we investigate it? And then again, a renter may have a sort of logic around, I'd much rather live in this dilapidated house in this neighborhood than in a larger house or a better place or a cheaper place, say on the east side of Cleveland. And we do hear that. So a lot of our work is around trying to assess what's going on in this ecosystem, trying to come up with a way, you know, on the one hand, folks like Erica and Mary are trying to provide frameworks for people. They're trying to provide logics to landlords, which is really important. But it's equally important for us to go find out what logics are they currently using. Because when we design public policy, we design interventions, we engage in communications, we have to navigate what's already on the ground and the things that they're already believing. And so the first step is going and figuring out what's there.
Great, thank you. And then, you know, we're using our work to try to inform some of the practical solutions to this work. We're also living it, you know, at any given point, probably a third of our tenants, across our portfolio are behind in rent. And so we're constantly balancing our need to manage, you know, each of those very individual situations, help people walk through bureaucratic systems of rental assistance and other kinds of resources, and also serving a variety of types of tenants. You know, so we recommend to our community organization partners ways that they can support equitable landlording practices, you know, through making higher vulnerability tenant situations be part of the metrics of their success. So we really encourage organizations, many of whom I know are represented on this call, to build metrics into their strategic planning for housing accessibility. Like, what does it mean to support a middle neighborhood and support public dollars going into a neighborhood, while also seeing what, you know, some of the perhaps unintended consequences are of those dollars. We try to raise awareness about the potential downsides of certain policies, like code enforcement, which can be a tool in the toolbox of supporting a stabilized neighborhood, but which also can have unintentional consequences of pushing out more vulnerable renters. We truly dig deep into all available tools to promote non-eviction based problem-solving approaches. And this can get very messy, and it can involve a lot of different participants. And we really work hard to try to think through who could partner in these problem-solving approaches. You know, we've worked very closely with the local CDC that we mentioned earlier. And one of the solutions there to build an eviction diversion approach was to have a staff meeting every week to across, you know, for staff members to join across a number of different departments to really come together and do that problem solving in a very on the ground sort of way. You know, all of this sort of leading to encouraging community organizations and public sector representatives to contextualize every decision that balances that balance, the mitigating risk and sustaining affordability that we are doing every day as landlords. We, in our own portfolio, support some of this work by balancing a mixed income portfolio. So we have some higher income units, which we see as sort of directly subsidizing the affordability of our lower income units. And we've actually found that to be a very successful practice, to the extent that our higher income tenants actually really like hearing that their dollars are going to a more mission-driven approach to rentals. We have worked really hard to build partnerships, to build in additional supports. We know that our model is not sustainable for many of those mom and pop landlords. And so subsidy is needed and resources are needed in the public and nonprofit sector. One piece that we think is a really, really critical piece for intervention is navigation, helping our tenants navigate access to social services. It tends to not be enough to simply say, you can call this number and go through the process to get rental assistance. A lot of folks need support, need help navigating those bureaucracies often, and just the paperwork involved. And really focusing on protocols for anti-eviction support. We have been building out that protocol, kind of like, where do we go from here when this happens? And that professionalizing can be supported by training programs such as the ones we've heard from today. But really often it comes down to that relational aspect of mediation and helping to build partnerships to fast track rental assistance or other supports. So to wrap this up, we see our work as a call to action. We certainly don't have any clear solutions here, but we do believe that private landlords are, by necessity, to the extent that they are the majority provider of lower income housing in America, must be critical participants in middle neighborhoods. But we also see their roles and their motivations and potential to influence those neighborhoods as not well understood. And that, is why we're researching and focusing on this. Understanding landlord logics that Scott kind of described a little bit about how we see the variety and diversity of kind of sense making that happens across the sector is essential to designing effective supports and incentives to retain accessibility in these neighborhoods. We do believe that values-based frameworks can align landlord interests, their business interests, with community development goals. And we hope that, all of you as partners and those in Cleveland that we're working with will continue to explore building out those kinds of incentives, using those, understanding like what is currently the spectrum of landlord logics that they have to work with. In order to really build out the customized, nuanced strategies that will influence those landlords to behave the way that we hope they will. So we are always looking for more thought partners in this work, and we hope to hear from you. Please feel free to reach out to either or both of us after this, and we'd love to continue these conversations.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Scott. That was really interesting. I'm really an egghead about a lot of community development stuff. So I love that exploration of the perspective of the different actors in the market and what's going on in terms of their thinking right now. One question just occurred to me, Anna and Scott. Do you think that your neighbors regard you as good landlords in the neighborhood?
I think that's a kind of a loaded question. Honestly.
Yeah, it is. I know.
I think that to really kind of think about that question, that's kind of what we ask folks to think about carefully, because to be a good landlord, you could be many different things. You could be somebody who keeps your house super well maintained, and that might mean you have high income tenants. You could be somebody who's had a property for a while and rents at a lower rent and gets accolades for not contributing to gentrification, but you also are renting mostly to, say, middle income college students or predominantly white youth or something, as opposed to targeting the high need area. So I think probably there are those who appreciate what we're doing in our neighborhood. We live where we work, as said. I think there's definitely those who find this a bit challenging because, you know, we have tenants who have real problems, the sort of problems that some neighbors probably would rather not have in their neighborhood.
Mhm.
And those problems in some ways come with those tenants, and our job is to figure out how to equitably serve those tenants while managing the relationships with those neighbors. And that can really be a dance. And that's again, that's somewhere where if you're going to have landlords doing this sort of work in a middle neighborhood, they need help with that dance. Because it's like it's a community relations problem that's again being put on somebody's shoulders who has no formal training in that.
Agree. Well, speaking of formal training, you know, as listening to everyone, I wonder if Anna and Scott, if you think you could ever get to a place where you might design a module that could be incorporated into some of the more standardized landlord training that other people like Erica and Mary are doing on eviction avoidance and, you know, problem solving and all of those things. Are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely the dream and the goal, and in many ways, the purpose of everything we're doing. And also, there's a lot of toilets to fix and such.
Yeah, yeah.
35 people with 35 units that all have all built in the early 1900s. So, you know, we've got
Yeah,
a couple.
yeah. One of the questions that was in the chat was in reaction to your comment about code enforcement being something that can contribute to pushing out renters. And so, of course, their question, you can see it in the chat, is what if the tenants themselves are someone contributing to the poor standard of the housing? If they're destructive, I assume they mean.
And that's absolutely the case. I mean, like, but I want to affirm that we have 2 or 3 situations I can think of at the moment where the amount of damage done and like the kind of degradation of the quality of the property is directly connected to the behaviors and maintenance of the tenant. And so, you know, I mean, like again, the traditional answer is like, we'll get rid of that person and get somebody better in. And our whole theory is like, okay, but then where does that person go? You know, that person has children. Those children are gonna like that's just gonna snowball down through the generations. Somebody's got to kind of not pass the buck. And so a big part of our model is kind of putting ourselves in the line of fire and saying we're not going to pass the buck. We're not sure what we're going to do. But it's a very good question, and it's something we wrestle with every day.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, I noticed that question too. And I know that, you know, we've been doing a lot of talking about eviction reduction. And I just want to stress that from the landlord perspective, no one likes evictions. You know, landlords don't like evictions. Renters, of course, don't like evictions. That's a given. But I'm going to make a controversial statement. And I'm going to say sometimes evictions are necessary. I'll give you an example. As an owner, I experienced at one of my properties a shooting, and someone was wounded in that shooting. And it turns out that there was a situation where, you know, there was drug activity. And in the course of that, not only was the person wounded who was related to the unit, but also, you know, with some of the artillery that is on the streets right now, a bullet went through one of the units of an unrelated person. No one was struck in that unit, but if the police told that person, if you had, you know, she was laying on the floor just by chance, if she was in the bed, then she would have likely been affected. So I'm saying all that to say, this is a case where, you know, if you have crime or some kind of activity like that at your property, Illinois is a judicial state. You can't just tell people you have to go. You have to go through that eviction process. So, you know, when I saw Ken's question about what if tenants are contributing to that substandard housing, sometimes that is the case. And in order to create a better situation for the other people who live in that building, the eviction is something that you have to do. And one thing that we do for that is we actually offer eviction observations for our borrowers and attendees of our property management training. So what we do is, you know, most evictions proceedings are virtual now. So we'll invite people to come into our office. We go to our boardroom and we observe real-time evictions that are happening at the courthouse, not too far from us. And we also invite in an experienced attorney who is explaining to the people in the room what they're observing, in that observation. So worst case, nothing anybody ever wants to do. But if you are ever faced with the need to go through an eviction process, we want our people to be prepared to know what to do, how to do it, and how to make it work.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think one of the things that we have to be careful with on this topic in general is that is to not design all of our policy and procedures around the worst case situation, right? That there's a lot that's between the ideal situation and the one where people are literally, in danger physically. And it does feel to me like there's so much room for improvements and lessons to be learned about the alternatives to that. Sort of like it makes me recall, that national program Alternatives to Violence, where people have just really taken on, there's, it's a very systematic thing about how to teach people to do something different. And so anyway, I'll just say, I know that as Rosie's pointed out in the chat, it's true. Nobody likes evictions. And as she points out, it's probably more often the landlord that's the problem in her code enforcement division than the renter. And so there's just a lot to be learned. I want to change things up just a little bit and sort of ask Mary to talk about like what kind of resources do you think landlords most need right now that they just don't have access to, particularly the things that might tackle that one issue that Scott mentioned about, from the neighborhood's point of view, how the property looks in the neighborhood, which can make people forgive a lot of other stuff that goes on. But what do people say about resources, and are they, maybe that's not a fair question because there's so many different types of landlords. I assume you have some that are just in it for the cash flow and some that are in it for the long-term equity gain, and they would behave differently about maintaining properties.
It's an interesting question. We haven't found the answer yet. I mean, I think most of these conversations circle back to the same question: what's a cost versus an investment? We struggle with, I think we try to have both carrots and sticks. The carrots being, hey, are you interested in a grant for a roof repair, or do you need new windows in your unit? And those funders, depending on, then it's also that other golden rule of those with the gold make the rules, and they have incentives tied to those dollars. They're trying to achieve a purpose or an outcome in their community by making that investment. And we started with a great funding partner who said, tell us what you need in your community. We want each community's use of these funds to be completely tailored to your needs. But as we went through, more and more objectives got layered into the program to say, well, we wanted to go to small business landlords. Okay, well, here in Rochester, we're calling that not owning more than 9 units. Well, then that's going to not allow so and so to use this, and we want that to be used. So it's very hard. You have to be targeted. I don't think that one grant can solve a broad range of issues. I think you have to be very targeted. I really like this conversation being focused on middle neighborhoods. It's not, a one tool fits all situation, but if you can identify through research, which I'm going to be reaching out to Anna and her team, it is important to know more about what's going on so you can have the right tools at your disposal, but we can't spend years and years just constantly trying to understand. You also have to act. So I don't think I gave an answer. I think I gave only problems. But but that's what we found. We think we have a great idea. $1 million sounded like a lot of money. It went really quickly. We couldn't even fit a whole fix everything one unit needed. We wanted buy-in from the owner. We wanted to have certain restrictions to include to make sure that they weren't going to turn around and just rent it out to a higher income household. We want these dollars to stay with with the community that needs the most, increase housing quality for those who are most unstable, but it's really hard once you start to pull apart the onion. So you need to layer in additional resources to make sure that that investment is tied to a network of things to help stabilize. And then once you add up all those dollars, people are like, oh, well, that's too much money. We can't invest that much money into one unit. But it's not about that unit looking better. It's about making those changes in the community and access to units for everybody. So we're just trying to figure out better ways to evaluate that investment's impacts on more people, because per person it is expensive.
Yeah. You know, I mean, it does when I listen to you talk, you know, the first thing that goes to my mind is that it could be just like we often do for homeowners. It would be nice to have some flexible funds if you're a CDC to solve some of the problems that that are out there without you know, having to run the gamut of federal regulation and all, as you say, all the additional layers that a landlord has to get through, because there has to be some motivation for them to go through it as well. I'm going to push the limits on and ask one more question that's really on my mind, which is, you know, when I do neighborhood strategy, I really like to have focus groups of landlords from the neighborhood too, just to understand, like, you know, what their perspective is. And I always ask for it to be, don't just give me what you consider to be the good landlords, give me a mix of them. And I invariably observe this fascinating phenomenon where in a small group, the good landlords and the bad landlords will start debating different topics. And there's a lot of learning that goes on, a lot of holding each other accountable. You know, that whole thing you said, Scott, about landlords having the perspective that they're not responsible for their tenants' behavior. And then I'll have a different landlord say, well, wait a minute, you know, yada, yada, yada. Have any of you ever had any experience with, or perhaps Erica, we were talking about people enjoying the interaction of just facilitating the cross fertilization between landlords on best practices and tips?
Sure. Well, yeah, in terms of that, we don't have like any kind of barriers to our classes. We don't say you have to have this much experience or you have to own a property. So as a result of that, we get a wide range of people who take our class. We will have people who've you know, been an owner for 30 years and they're coming to check us out to see what's new. And we'll have people who have not made a purchase yet. You know, they're thinking about, do I want to do this? So the benefit of having these different experiences in a class is that people literally, I mean, it's not, you know, it's not a cliche. People learn from each other, and you know, it really helps people with the fresh perspective. So that is one of the you know, best parts of our class, and we get that in our surveys. People say that's what they enjoy.
That's interesting. It seems to me like a lever that if we had the staff time, et cetera, to facilitate that we could get a lot more out of. My my colleague is telling me to wrap it up here. I do want to point out, I think this is a great question. It was for Anna and Scott, but I think I'm going to ask all of our panelists to do this, and maybe we can include it in the follow-up email to everyone, which is what are the 3 to 5 most cited aha moments on the landlord side and on the tenant side in terms of people reacting to the training or consultation that you do. So we'll see if we can get that out of our panelists. And if we can, then we'll include that in our follow-up email. So again, a big thank you to all of you. What a big, huge, complicated topic, but I hope we've at least created the notion that this stuff needs attention, and to leave it just in the wild to its own devices is probably not going to serve any of the actors in it in an ideal way. So I appreciate all the work that you do. Do please follow us at LinkedIn. I don't know if I have control over these slides now because I think Anne had to take off. But I will also say, if you go to our website, there we go. You can join the community practice simply by signing up for our mailing list. So it's ncsT.org/middle-neighborhoods. And we have all of our recorded webinars in there and our slide decks. We have a lot of other resources there, so we encourage you to give us a visit. And I hope that this, starts some conversations in your communities about how you might more proactively serve landlords and try to see what you can do to add to the situation of having quality, affordable housing for everybody, and small businesses that work for the people who own them, and a real asset to the neighborhoods of some affordable quality housing. So thanks, everybody, and we'll follow up with an email and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.